Thank you for joining me for today's Daily Armor. We'll find our text today in 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse number 27. If you find your Bibles and open to 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse number 27, I'll read for us. Verse 27 says, "But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, Haste thee, and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land." Now you may ask, why in the world would this be a good verse? Why is this verse something that gets me excited and has been a source of comfort in my life, something that I would want to share with others? Let me give you a little background. You don't have to turn there, but if you ever want to read the accounts, it'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 15. This gives us a little background, kind of going back to the beginning of what all has, the reasons behind what all has been taking place. But Saul was anointed to be king of Israel. The people wanted a king, and so God allowed them for them to have their choice. And he had Samuel anoint Saul to be king, and he gave Saul some very specific instructions. And Saul went about to do what God had asked him to do, and in the midst of it, he made a few little changes. He had a good idea. God had told him to destroy King Agag, and he said, I'm going to keep him. Maybe that King Agag had some information, maybe there was some resources, some things that maybe he knew were some things that Saul thought would be beneficial to the kingdom. Then the people had a good idea. The people said, let's keep all that was good. So the Lord had instructed Saul to not keep anything. Don't keep the cattle, nothing. He told him to destroy and not keep anything. And the people had a great idea, but let's keep all that's good. And Saul, being a people pleaser, he liked to listen to the people. I could imagine him being one of those who loved to tickle their ears. So he liked to tell them things that made them happy. He liked keeping the people happy. He was a people pleaser, and he tried his best to do what they wanted. And so he agreed, and he allowed them to keep all the best sheep, all the best oxen, and they destroyed everything else. So they weren't having compassion or anything. They were, if you think about it, what they were asking for and what they did was all about flesh. They kind of disguised it in saying that they were doing it so that they would have better things to sacrifice to the Lord. Now, through all this, through his disobedience, through Saul's disobedience, Samuel had a message from the Lord, and he shared it with Saul, and he told Saul, he says, because you have not obeyed the word of the Lord, that God has rejected you. And all this is in 1 Samuel chapter 15, and you can go sometime and you can go back and read that. So all of these things led Saul on a downward spiral. And if you look in 1 Samuel chapter 16, God had Samuel to anoint David. You'll find that account in 1 Samuel 16. And David wasn't immediately put into the position of king, but Samuel was obedient and anointed him anyway, but David was God's choice. If you look at the way that the Lord describes David, a man after his own heart, he told Samuel, he said, don't look on the outward appearance. He said, because God looks on the heart. He looks on the inside. And so through the Lord's direction, Samuel anointed David to be king. Well, this is when we get up here to chapter 23, this has been many years later, and David is still not king. And you may ask, well, if God anointed him to be king, why isn't he king? Well, it's not why isn't he king, it's just when. So God said he was going to be the next king, and it's his timing, and it's his it's up to him about when that takes place. So in the course of all these events, Saul becomes jealous of David, angry with David, and he turns somebody who should not be an enemy into an enemy. And he actually pursues David, and he pursues him constantly. And when we come up to chapter 23, it looks like it's going to be the end of David. It looks like that nothing could keep Saul from being able to seize David, and what he wanted to do was kill him. So that was his intention. So David was trapped by the enemy. I feel like that if you go back and read those accounts, that in chapter 23, that he's going up on a mountain, and so he's trapped. So Saul is pursuing him. He's coming up on the mountain. There's nowhere else for David to go. I'm in my imagination and visualizing them hiding. They could, a lot of times when you're being hunted, you're listening and you're watching for the enemy. And that's what I am assuming that David and his men were doing, is they were watching out for who was pursuing them. They were watching out for the king and all of his army that he brought with him. So they're hiding, they're looking, and they see the enemy coming, and they're backed in a corner because there's nowhere else for them to go. They can't go back down the mountain because they would run right back into Saul. So they're kind of stuck. And the reason I get so excited is because when you go to what the verse that is today, we're at it's right here at the peak. And at verse 27, in the midst of all this, David is trapped. There's nowhere else for him to go. And then there's a but. And I love it when God butts in. I love it when you're reading the scriptures and it doesn't look all that good, but then you see a but. And that's one of these cases where it looks like there's no hope. All is this, it's a helpless situation. All hope is gone. But then read verse 27. But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, Haste thee, and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. The Philistines are attacking Israel. Saul and his army wasn't at home where they were supposed to be. They were pursuing David, which should not be an enemy. And this looks like that he's finally going to get his man. He's finally going to get his way, but God steps in. And I just love it when God steps in and makes all the difference. It looks like that David's not going to be the next king. It looks like he's fixing to die. But yet there comes a messenger, just right in the nick of time, right on time, because God is always on time. We want him to hurry. We want him to be early, but he's always on time. Now, when David looks back at this, one of my favorite Psalms, if you read these accounts that happened to David, and then you go read Psalms 27, which is one of my absolute favorite Psalms, you will see why David can say what he says in that Psalm. And that'll be for another day. But for today, but there came a messenger and Saul saying, Haste thee and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. And look at verse 28. Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. He left. He had to stop immediately. He did not know he was right there fixing to get his way, but he was interrupted. And God interrupted the situation. God's timing is always perfect. And he interrupted the situation, and he had a different diagnosis. He had a different scenario that was going to take place that day. So Saul goes back down the mountain with his army and leaves to go defend Israel from the Philistines. And David is once again been freed from the enemy that was about to overtake him. It makes me think of just last night. At church, we had prayer meeting and people were sharing their prayer requests. Well, one of the couples, and they sit behind me in church, they wanted to have a praise. And so the wife shared that the husband had been given a diagnosis several months before of Alzheimer's. And they had recently seen a new neurologist to find out what the next steps were. And he ordered some new tests, some different tests. And what they found out was that this Alzheimer's diagnosis had been a misdiagnosis, that he does not have Alzheimer's. He does have some things wrong with his brain, but they are treatable. It revealed some damage, it revealed some things, but these are things that were treatable. And so we are just praising the Lord, because this is one time when it looks like everything's going bad. It looks like the enemy has caught, and trapped somebody that the Lord is protecting, but he steps in. And this new doctor, this new diagnosis has given him hope. He does have to do some exercises with his brain, and there is going to be a long road to restore what has taken place, but there is hope. And I am so excited for this couple. They are so sweet. And I am so excited because God is so great and He is so good and He is so marvelous and He is so wonderful that He could make all of this come to pass. When we look at these scriptures and what happens with David, and when God says something's going to take place, it's simply going to take place. When you can say that you're safe in the arms of the Lord, you are absolutely safe. Now, does that mean that everything always works out perfectly? No. Just like with this couple, they still have a long road ahead of them to get some recovery and to get some help. But they have that hope, and that hope is in the Lord. And I'm just so thankful. And I hope this gives you a little bit of hope. And whatever your situation is, whatever your circumstances look like, may you have a little hope that the Lord's going to step in His timing and in His way. And you will just be giving nobody praise but Him. It all goes to Him. Everything points to Him. And when it doesn't point to Him, something is wrong. When it's pointing to others, something is wrong. But it should always point to Him. Thank you for joining me today.